Morning all. I've just come back from seeing quite a good film called Angels and Demons with Tom Hanks and Ewan McGregor. Let's play a 5-minute game.
Game started.
So 1986 at the moment, against Nessi. Alright, knight f3, non-committal move. Should I be boring and play a symmetrical English? Would this try and frustrate the opponent, or am I going to end up in a lost position? So someone played this against me in the British Championship, and I ended up getting quite impatient with a weakening pawn move, and I lost horribly. But we've broken the structure now anyway, so it's not quite symmetrical. Maybe I've got potential though for c4 and b5 here, with pressing on the queen side in the endgame here. The way my opponent's just captured. Unless he's going to isolate my pawn with d takes c5, allowing c4 might not be a good idea. I think I'll go for it actually, although I'm taking the risk that e4 as a breakout is going to be a good move potentially. But if I can try and clamp down on e4 by like rook e8, no, he's forcing my hand. Okay, now what about knight d5 here? Just trying to set up that blockade, not minding the loss of the dark squared bishop. Got to be careful about my king though, my king safety on this diagonal. If I can get in bishop e7, it doesn't take on d6, maybe bishop e7 is worth playing. Okay, so okay, what's the situation here? If I can maintain this blockade on d5 and avoid getting mated, but g6 would weaken my dark squares, so if he's got no queen d3, I'd rather not play g6. What about just bishop e6 here? Bishop e6, maybe just rook d8, trying to get some indirect pressure on the d4 pawn. So rook a d8. I like the blockading knight, and I like the fact that that pawn's on c4 at the moment, so I'm not too scared about this battery with queen d3. What I would be more concerned about is creating more dark squared weaknesses with g6. These could be potentially fatal, because I have no dark squared bishop. So will the opponent force, some dark squared weaknesses? What can I do with my rooks though? I can maybe double them on the d file to indirectly attack d4. Or do I want to play f6 here and then shift my bishop to f7 so I can at least play rook d8? Alright, I'm tempted to actually, to be honest. There's no rook e6s at the moment. There's bishop g3 though, which is annoying. So okay, but maybe queen d7, and maybe I can play bishop g6 to neutralise this diagonal. So I'm still hopeful here that I can play the move rook a d8 now and potentially gain a positional advantage. Maybe even bishop g6 to get rid of the opponent's bishop pair. Maybe weaken the light squares. If I weaken these light squares, then maybe knight a5 to b3 is going to be handy. So my king safety is also potentially improved. What about king f7 here? Is that far too risky? Got to watch out for things like knight e5 check, etc. But I think I'll play it actually. Actually, knight h4, no, it's not so clever. What about just queen f7 here? Queen f7. So if knight h4, then I'd have to think about f5. But with queen f7, I can now play rook d7. Okay, am I thinking about f5? But then I weaken the dark squares. Or king h7. Then maybe rook e4. But his pieces are tilting a bit away from the centre. So maybe king h7 is worth playing here. I think I'll play that king h7. So if rook e4 to g4, then it's a lot of effort just to put more pressure on g6. In the meantime, doubling up rooks on d file, rook d7, rook fd8 seems tempting. I just want to exploit that pawn. There's no tactical idea with knight g5 here, is there? I would hope. So hopefully I can just double up rooks, maybe move my king back to g8 to see if my opponent would repeat, but I don't think he's going to. Okay. Alright, now given that my knight's on d5 protecting e7, what about knight a5 to b3? That would leave the knight maybe in a more aggressive position. Okay, knight a5 to b3. What do I have to be concerned about here? Rook e6s or Queen h4 check, maybe. Maybe Queen h4 check. But
Check.
the Queen's off centre. If there's no direct attack, I just wonder my opponent's neglect of the centre here. And he hasn't got that light squared bishop to attack with. This bishop seems a bit stuck. So I'm just going to try and keep my opponent's pieces restricted, I think, here, from a strategic point of view. Maybe just win the d4 pawn now, which is in pre. Ah, it's not in pre. Okay, so let's see. Knight takes d2, is that worth playing? We're simplifying the position a little bit more. If I don't, maybe knight e4 is dangerous, but then knight c6. Okay, the knight will be again attacking d4 though from c6, so maybe that's not so bad. Alright, it's a bit of cat and mouse now. What about just a5 and then b4, just trying to use this majority? I mean, it's attacking c6 now, so maybe rook d6. Nope, bishop. Okay, what do I do about the knight on c6? Rook c8, maybe. I could also consider knight e5, trying to snatch that rook. So knight takes, queen takes, but then knight takes g6 maybe is strong, trying to get an attack against my king. I'll take a pair of rooks off, and maybe just rook d8 again. Okay. Now here, I'll just try and get these pawns going. Finally, so b4. If I can play c3, I think these pawns are going to be dangerous. What do I have to be looking out for tactically though, which would interfere with this, just creating a pass pawn here? I think, well, the squares are pretty safe at the moment, so I think I can just get away with c3, getting it one step closer. I don't think it's that easy to round up the pawn. Can I get my queen in the game? Maybe queen c7. Queen c7, I'd drop that c3. What about rook e8? Rook e8 seems nice and positional. So I just want to get onto this file, but rook e1 would be dangerous, queen e6. But then takes in c2 actually. I think that's very interesting. Yeah. Am I provoking rook e1 there? Potential idea of queen sack. Okay, I'll get my king in. So positionally, what about f5 now and f4 to try and crampen my opponent on this side of the board. But he's not going to undouble my pawns, is he? Or is he? Yep, he's undoubled my pawns. So maybe this pawn's a target. Rook h4, now g5. That's interesting. Okay, I'll bring my king in and then play rook e6, I think, with the idea of also g4. If I can get in g4, maybe knight e3 in fact here is dangerous, and then g4. So then knight takes g4. Also c2 will be handy, but okay. So there's various plans. What about rook on the 7th? Rook a8 to a2 is also another neat plan, I think. That knight on e3 is a nice knight, which I should have had in one of my over-the-board games recently. I missed the opportunity for such a knight. So here, I'm stopping now rook e2, so if I can get in that rook a2, this should be really good. I like this. This is like a positional crush. If I can play knight takes f3 next, it's going to be all over. I think my opponent's getting mated. So it's a lovely rook on the 7th here. Often, I mean, once you get rook on the 7th, statistically disastrous. My opponent's resigned. Let's have a quick look at that game. I was quite pleased with that. So knight f3. So I played psychological game here, just the symmetrical English, which is an important variation of English. So my opponent with that exchange is giving me the opportunity not to have an isolated d-pawn, but instead I have to consider giving up the dark square bishop. The blockade on the isolated queen pawn is interesting here, because the opponent didn't have queen d3, that classic battery. And what happened next was interesting as well, just exchanging off the light squared bishop. So my king was arguably a bit more secure without the opponent having the two bishops. here I wasn't so bothered because the queen's a bit decentralised, but the exchange of rooks also I wasn't bothered by. Creating a passed pawn, I think, put the opponent under a bit of pressure positionally, and trying to seize this open file. I was offering queen sack because I think c2 would be extremely powerful after rook e1 if I could take and then play c2. So here, queen exchange again, offering the queen sack, but he didn't take it. Now a bit of squeezing in the endgame here. So I've got double pawns, and it's great that they were dissolved here. It leaves this pawn isolated and a target. So I went for that and started to centralise my king. And that knight on e3 was good. And now finally I saw a nice plan getting the rook to the 7th rank. But first knight takes d4 to prevent any knight e2.
Check.
So the rook on the 7th was decisive. I hope you enjoyed that. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.